The topic for today's discussion is the impact of COVID-19 on state finances and the way forward. And we have eminent panelists today with us. The session is chaired by Professor Vijayveer Singh, who is the Professor of Economics and currently the Dean Faculty of Social Sciences and Director Niti Aayog Chair, University of Rajasthan. The two eminent speakers, which are going to bring a blend of the policy prescription and policy implementation in our webinar today. We have the first panelist, Professor M. Govinda Rao, who will be speaking on the issues about central and state finances in general. Dr. Rao is a former member of the 14th Finance Commission and the non-resident senior fellow of National Council for Applied Economic Research, New Delhi. He was earlier the director of NIPFP, New Delhi, and also the former director of ISEC, Bangalore. He was also a member of the Economic Advisory Council to the Prime Minister of India, a member of the Financial Sector Legislative Reforms Commission, and various other high-level expert committees instituted by the center and the state governments. Dr. Rao's research interests include fiscal decentralization and federalism, state finances, local finances, tax policy and reforms, public expenditure management, etc. We welcome you, sir, for the webinar.
Thank you.
The second panelist for today's session is Dr. Arvind Mayaram, who is going to speak on the Rajasthan and the state finances and the economy. He is presently the Vice Chairman of Chief Minister's Rajasthan Economic Transformation Advisory Council and also the Economic Advisor to the Chief Minister of Rajasthan. He is a PhD in the finance and a certified public-private partnership specialist. He is also the chairman of the CUTS Institute for Regulation and Competition. He has served as the Finance Secretary to the Government of India and Special Secretary to the Ministry of Rural Development. He has also been a part of various national and international institutions like RBI, SEBI, World Bank, Asian Development Bank, etc. as the member as well as the chair on various boards. He played a pioneering role in mainstreaming the public-private partnership in India, and which had a special emphasis on the rural areas. In Rajasthan, he had held positions of Industry Secretary, Planning Secretary, and Commission Investments. We welcome you, sir, on this webinar.
Thank you.
Now I request Professor Vijayveer Singh to begin the discussion by giving a background to the issue and highlight the topic for this webinar. Over to you, sir.
Morning, everyone. First of all, I welcome two distinguished panelists, Professor M. Govinda Rao and Dr. Arvind Mayaram. We have the complete cycle. Professor Govinda Rao has been involved in advising government on various fiscal issues, and Dr. Mayaram has been on the hem of affairs in implementing various policies in the financial sector. I also welcome all the participants. And today's topic is very interesting, that we are discussing about the state finances, and after COVID particularly, it is not the central government, either it is the state government or local self-government which are the center of focus. They are implementing a scheme, they are monitoring a scheme, and they need funds. So that is the one issue. And second issue is with this COVID-induced lockdown, both center and state finances are going to hit, but finances of state governments are going to be hit harder in financial year this year and expected next year also. That degree, all the state and the regions are in states' own revenue sources. And these own revenue sources, the majority major sources are liquor, petroleum, stamp duty, registration. These are all activities which were closed down for a long period, and now we are in a restarting mode. At the same time, the expenditure of state governments, whether it is schemes or staff salaries, almost remained unchanged, and was come that government or the state government has to spend a lot of money on COVID measures. In future, both the old income stream of state governments as well as the industry, so their own revenues from center are also going to decline. Majority on the part of decline in GST. There is a one basic difference that is for the interest for students between the problem is being faced with, but center is its own master. They can plan their finances according to their choice, which liberty is not available with the states. They are dependent evolution of the center, and this has become more acute after the implementation of GST, where center has to compensate the loss of revenues till 2022. Now, revenues as a tax devolution to state governments, which are certainly going to decline because the revenue collection is not going to that much. If you look at the expenditure side, the state expenditure far exceeds that of the center. When revenue is falling, the cutback in spending may take place, which may not be a good situation at the time of COVID when we are dealing with the after COVID situation. And that's why lots of people are debating that should be a relaxation in fiscal deficits and states should be allowed to borrow more. But there is another aspect of state government finances also, that is the expenditure side. If you look at the devolution of 14th Finance Commission, for which Professor M. Govinda Rao has been the member, the devolution increased from 32% of central taxes to 42%. And the argument was given that states need greater control over the development expenditure of the states. And if you look at the data almost for last 5-6 years, that is 14 onwards till 19, almost 140% rise in devolution to state funds. And majority of these funds are untied. When we say untied, that more freedom has been given to states in terms of their allocations. Despite the significant increase in central allocation, if you look at the revenue deficit position of, I'm not talking of fiscal deficit, I'm talking of revenue deficit position of state governments, almost 50% states, half of states are in a revenue deficit situation. Then in that case, in addition to this devolution, almost guaranteed tax revenue growth of 14% by the center to compensate GST revenue was also assigned. So higher devolution from taxes, higher rise on account of GST, but still state governments are in revenue deficit situation. So that raises a big question. The allegation on state governments in general have been that due to rise in GST devolutions, state governments are not bothering too much for their generation of their own revenues. These are the allegations. Then they say that is the revenue bounty has been misspent by the governments, and whether you say the farm loan waivers or various type of subsidies, which could have been used for creating human capital or physical infrastructure. Similarly, if you look at the design of development or you see the development expenditure, the development expenditure of the state governments is almost stagnant, not rising much. And in certain sectors or key sectors like education, this allocation has come down by a certain percentage. Another area we all of us know that the DISCOM has been a big problem due to uneconomic power subsidies, and they are in huge debt. Once we talk of heavy borrowing from this by the state governments, one consequence is we know as a student of economics that if you are consuming bulk of domestic savings, then the less finances will be left for state government. Obviously, one issue which people debate is that precarious finances are with the both with the center and state, but center finances, whether on budget or off budget, are well known due to keen economic scrutiny by Controller General of Accounts every month, which is not case with the state finances. We know only the budgeted revenue and expenditure profile of the state, but so now people are debating, particularly the after this financial situation after COVID, that the state government should also be passing through this type of scrutiny so that there has to be transparency in revenue and expenditure side. Similarly, again and again, people are debating that the states need more finances, state is higher stimulus, but the issue is this news or these details are coming from the people like us who are debating, or chief ministers, or the officials. But how state finances are fragile, less weak, robust, this situation is not in black and white. That is one again allegation on the state governments. Now, if you look at the situation for future post-COVID, one thing is very clear that world as a whole is likely to see a structural shift in public expenditure. India cannot be, and public expenditure on health is going to be increased. Engagement of medical personnel to carve out this is there to be at the hope after COVID. And if we want to sustain growth momentum ahead, the public expenditure is going to be the key, because private expenditure may or private investment may come down. But investment, the most of the capital expenditure at the state level, almost 2/3 capital expenditure is being made by the state governments. So they are to be made integral part of the economic growth in future. If there is financial crunch, the productive capital expenditure is generally cut when revenue falls short, while self-motivated spending may be retained. So these are certain issues which come to our mind or being discussed. And today we are two eminent experts who are the best to evaluate these questions or reply to these questions. Once again, welcome you all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you for the introductory remarks. We'll start with Professor Rao, because he'll set the scene for the basics of the public finances and how the state and the center finances are supposed to work in general. So we'll move to Professor Govinda Rao, sir.
Thank you very much. At the outset, let me thank the Rajasthan Economic Association, Indian Econometric Society, and Niti Aayog chair in the University of Rajasthan for this interesting debate on the impact of COVID-19 on state finances. I'm particularly thankful because I'm a co-panelist with Arvind Mayaramji, whom I have known for a long time. And I'm sure this he will bring out a number of interesting issues with regard to the Rajasthan state finances. I'm also involved in some extra work that both Monte Ahluwalia and Rangarajan have forced me to do on Punjab and Tamil Nadu respectively. Just about finished some work for Tamil Nadu and some work for Punjab. So I'm quite aware of what the issues are, but I would like to broadly speak from the macro perspective. The scale of this disruption caused by the pandemic has never been, has never been seen before. It's unprecedented. It's much more than the global financial crisis that we have seen in 2008. And possibly many people compare this with the Spanish pandemic. And then in fact, many people have gone to the extent of saying that immediately after the pandemic there was a V-shaped revival, and that was possibly more due to the closure, the ending of the First World War rather than the pandemic. But nevertheless, there is as yet no clarity on how long this particular thing will last. There have been sort of selective relaxations, but then much of the economic hubs, economic production hubs, economic activity hubs are still under the hotspot. There is a huge amount of uncertainty, sharp decline in economic activity, sharp rise in unemployment, and obviously migrants with so much of uncertainty around the many of the laborers who have migrated from other places, with very little with reserves with them, because all the money that they were earning they were sending back home. They were hardly any reserves with them. They have been left in the lurch, and then the government can come up and say that you need to the employers need to continue to pay, but then if the employers are not earning, how would they pay? So there has been a collapse of market. There is a huge supply side disruption, supply chain disruption. So in other words, all these things are going to create more trouble even as we open up, because revival is not going to be that smooth. That has happened immediately after we started the lockdown, and even before the government of India, when the lockdown was announced, it was done under the National Disaster Management Act. But there is a bit of a problem because public health and public order are the state subjects. Though entry 27 in the concurrent subjects say that prevention and extension of contagious diseases from one state to another could be a matter which is in the concurrent list. So center does have a role to play, and particularly as there is a lot of interstate migration also is taking place. Now, while the states intervened on this issue through the Epidemic Disease Act of 1897, the government of India entered into the entire thing through the National Disaster Management Act 2005, and then completely centralized the decision making. Now, this is the thing, you require a coordinated action between the union and the states. Now, if you say that, the government of India will decide which activity should be permitted, which activity should not be permitted. Government of India will decide which area should be allowed to function, sort of be relaxed, and which area should not be relaxed. Things become very much more difficult. And so there was on the one hand, there was this complete centralization, and on the other, as a matter of fact, the states are in the forefront fighting the pandemic. Now they are closer to the people. They had to sort of intervene to immediately augment the health infrastructure in terms of providing PPE, the inventor, and all the equipments that are needed, protective gear, testing kits, ventilators, hospital beds, everything had to be augmented. And unfortunately, the states had throughout this thing, states had neglected the healthcare sector, and suddenly that comes into the fore because obviously you find a huge gap between what is required and what they have. At the same time, they have no money. The lockdown has completely drained their resources off, and when the lockdown drained the resources off, there was not much money forthcoming. In fact, Kerala government announced a package of sort of 20,000 crores, went to the market to borrow, and then ended up with a huge yield. In fact, they had to borrow at almost at 9% cost, which is exorbitant. Now, I mean, if one wants to see, look at the number of, the amount of money that states used to send on healthcare sector in terms of per capita, Bihar used to spend something like 690 rupees, and Uttar Pradesh is 814 rupees per capita, and Kerala was the highest with 2092 rupees. And this has continued for years together, and the total health sector expenditure as a percentage of GDP both at the center and the state level included, is just 1.2. So there has been a sharp decline in the revenues, and in fact, there is a lot of speculation on what the economy, how will the economy, sort of about the growth rate of the economy. Those who actually talked about 2%, 3% are now saying that it will be negative territory, and most of the credit rating agencies have come up with the negative growth of 5%. And of course, State Bank of India talks about 5.8% negative growth. So there has been a sharp decline in revenue. So, and the projections are that, out of, the aggregate revenues of the state is something like 17 lakh crore. Out of that, something like 12.5 lakh crores are their own revenue, about something like about 5.5 lakh crores is from the transfers. Now, when you have this sort of a situation, the shortfall in their own revenues and then transfers together is likely to be somewhere close to, something like almost 4 lakh crores or 4.5 lakh crores, which will be something like 2% of GDP, at least. This is the minimum that one can talk about. And on the devolution side, if you really want to look at, even before the Finance Commission's report, the ink of the Finance Commission's report is dry, you see that the budget estimates and Finance Commission's estimate for 2020-21 are substantially different. And in fact, according to the budget estimates, the tax devolution will be lower by 71,000 crores as compared to what the Finance Commission had assumed. Now, this is to begin with, and with the decline in the economic activity, there will be substantial reduction in the, some decline in the revenue collections at the center. So obviously, the tax devolution is likely to be substantially lower. As I mentioned, we are looking at a lower revenue deficit, lower revenues for the own revenues and the transfer to the tune of somewhere about 4.5 lakh crores. Now, the states have been making a lot of representation with the center. They have been requesting that, look, things have happened not because of a mistake. There are problems with the economic activity. Lockdown has been announced, and then obviously there is no money that is forthcoming. Some of the states actually went on to defer the salary payment, whether it is Andhra Pradesh or Telangana or Maharashtra. Even a CPM ruled government like Kerala said that 6 days salary will be deferred for the next 6 months. So they have been put in very hard budget constraints. Many of the state governments have written to the Prime Minister requesting that, at least the Prime Minister should ask the Finance Ministry to give something like a 1 lakh crore COVID grants so that its immediate problems can be sorted out. But that has not happened. There was some increase in the ways and means advances. In fact, you see, that works out to somewhere about 56,000 crores. But that is basically ways and means advances, and then it will only help the state governments in trying to time their borrowing. Now, so both on the revenue side, they have a problem. On the expenditure side, obviously, they had to augment expenditures on basic health infrastructure and look after the large number of migrants and then unorganized worker people. So there has been a very serious, serious fiscal constraint as far as the states are concerned. In fact, they were hoping that when the finance ministry announced the various packages, they were hoping that they will get at least this will be taken into account. So in the first 4 installments, there was nothing. In the 5th installment, the finance minister said that the states can borrow additional 2% of GDP but she said conditions apply. Now, in the meantime, I mean, I'll come to the question of conditions. In the meantime, what has the center done? You know, in a situation like this, one expected the central government to help the state governments, you know, sort of in the spirit of cooperative federalism. Now, the center itself said that they will be cutting their own expenditure to the tune of 5 to 10%, which basically implies that much of the cut will happen on the centrally sponsored schemes. Of course, in the last installment of this thing, in the stimulus, the finance minister said that she's increasing the allocation to Narega, but in respect of many other things, there is likely to be cut in the centrally sponsored, because that is the easiest thing to cut. When you say that various ministries you cut the expenditure, then they'll say easiest thing to cut is the centrally sponsored schemes. And so obviously there is likely to be a substantial cut in the centrally sponsored schemes. The other important thing is that you see this COVID is also accompanied by a very sharp decline in the international price of crude oil. What did the central government do? It comes up and then says that we are going to increase the additional excise duties on, on crude oil substantially, additional excise duties on the petroleum products. As a result, what happens? The taxable space that exists for the state government is eroded. States have very few taxes with them. On GST, they don't really have a maneuverability. As far as the other taxes are concerned, they have only the value-added taxes on petroleum products, the excise duty and the sales taxes on alcoholic products, stamps and registration fees, and taxes on motor vehicles. These are the only four major taxes that they have. The others are minor. Now, when the central comes up with a substantial increase in the additional excise duties on oil products, then obviously the states are left with very little of taxing space. So despite that, some of the states have been increasing, but in any case, any increase that could happen only when it happened only after partial relaxations were started. So the entire month of April was a very difficult month for the state government. And then they said that now what has happened is that the central, the electricity generating utilities, generating companies of the central government, NTPC and others, they are now saying that there should be advance payment for electricity purchased from by the discoms, which basically is, I mean, of course, they said that 90,000 crores will be given as a loan to the discoms by the REC and then Power Finance Corporation, but that's something which, it's a loan. It is not going to happen. It's not something which is, basically to recover the money from the discounts that, this has been done. Now, thankfully, yesterday, of all this thing, until yesterday, the GST compensation was not paid. Yesterday, they paid GST compensation up to February. Earlier, the GST compensation for the loss of revenue was given only up to November. So the December, January, February, these things were given yesterday. That will provide some relief to the state, but certainly there is a bigger question of what will happen to the GST compensation altogether. Now, let me come to the additional borrowing space. Of course, every state has asked for additional borrowing space, and the union government has said that, look, you can have additional 2% borrowing to GDP borrowing space. Even when we had the global financial crisis in 2008, the central government allowed the state to borrow 1.5% of GDP more, but they did not put any conditions. But in this particular case, four conditions are put. 4 sets of conditions have been put. One is, basically one nation, one ration card, which basically requires linking of Aadhaar with the linking of Aadhaar number with the ration card, and sort of ensuring that every ration shop has a POS, um, POS machine. And then they said that, you see, on the ease of doing business, they said that you need to have a district level assignment, assessment of the norm, assessment of the ease of doing business as per the norms they've done by the Department of Industrial and Internal Trade. There should be automatic renewal of industrial and commercial licenses, and making randomized inspections with prior notice and transparency. And the third one is the power sector reforms, which is possibly the biggest elephant in the room. Most of the states have really found it very difficult to do the power sector reforms, which would entail reduction in sort of AT&C losses, and sort of giving direct cash transfers instead of subsidizing electricity, and reducing the gap between average cost and average revenue. And then finally, the urban local body reforms, basically the reforms on property taxes and then charging for water and electricity. Now, these urban local body reforms has also been mandated by the 15th Finance Commission for giving urban local body grants. In fact, they have already mandated this particular reform. I would not say there is basically anything specifically wrong with the reform process as such, but my problem is that, number one, this has never happened in the past, and you have created a precedent. Of course, the Constitution allows you to do that, because 293, Article 293(3) basically tells that the state governments have to seek the permission of the center to borrow if they are indebted to the center. And Article 293, subclause 4 basically says that the center can put in conditions that it deems necessary. Now, but the point is, until in these 70 years, we have never had a situation where for borrowing, the government had to, sort of had imposed any conditions. And in fact, it is not conditions on the central government borrowing, it is the conditions on borrowing from the market. And which basically, and then now anytime you want, this is one of the major centralizing things that has happened. Anytime you want in the future, there is a precedence now, any type of thing can be imposed. The second issue is, do you really need to, these reforms have been done by sitting together and discussing things, what is the best way forward and how this can be done. I mean, obviously, one nation, one ration card is not going to be a major problem. It is desirable. Similarly, ease of doing business, everybody wants to attract capital. And then power sector reforms, in fact, Tamil Nadu is doing this, some other type of reforms, like, sort of they are encouraging the farmers to purchase, create solar systems so that they can take the power directly from there. And if there is a surplus power, they can sell it to the grid. Now, in other words, do we really need to do the micro management of the entire reform process in this particular thing? Could this have been done by sitting together and discussing together in a spirit of cooperative federalism? That's one of the major issues that I have. Well, now the idea is that half a
Can't hear. I
Sir,
think
Professor
something
Rao,
has happened.
Professor Rao, you are unmute. You are mute. Kindly unmute yourself. Yeah. Please go ahead.
No, I mean, I don't know why it happened. Anyway, so once you fulfill the 4 conditions, you can get 1% of GDP additional. And if you fulfill at least 3 conditions, you will get the other half a percent more. So there is a certain, so I very much appreciate the fact that traditional borrowing space has been given. But then at least, since this is loan and there is a lot of, the repayment is going to be a major issue as we go along. But one is still hoping that the government of India will come up with some amount of relief to the states, because at the end of the day, the fiscal space for the states are limited, and borrowing more and more is not going to help them. So to summarize, the state finances are in dire straits. They have merely agencies. They have been made merely agencies of the center in this particular whole entire episode. They, in fact, excessive centralization that has taken place has rendered them basically central agencies rather than having independent existence. In fact, even if you want to do something, if you want to open a restaurant, then, you'll have to ask the central government, sir, can we open this restaurant? I mean, that's happened in the case of Karnataka. Now, this is, one was hoping that they will get much more stimulus. The stimulus in general has been on the supply side, and more needs to be done on the demand side if you really want a recovery to take place at a faster pace. Then I'm still hoping for a pandemic grant, but possibly that may be wishful thinking. So the entire thing has reset the union-state financial relationship, and then it has brought in severe questions. Shall I say, to conclude, the cooperative federalism is in quarantine? Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you for your remarks on the center and state finances in general and explaining us about the situation which has arisen after the COVID. We'll now move on to Dr. Arvind Mayaram. Over to you, sir, for your talk.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure having being on a webinar with Professor Rao. Professor Rao has put the entire subject into a great perspective. I think from the state government's point of view, as he has already mentioned, the state finances are in great difficulty. And so the major issue, if we look at it in terms of analysis, is in two parts. The first part is the stress that the finances were facing already before the COVID, because the economy has been now slowing down, I would think, since 2 years. But I think it's the continuing impact of demonetization. And we had seen decline in not only the investment rate, the savings rate, but the GDP has very sharply declined. Even before the COVID came in, the estimation for 1920 was, the year fiscal 1920 was 4.8%. But now we have seen that it has gone down to 4.1%. I think in the next revision, it is going to go down further, which is the last year. So this is before the COVID kicked in. And in the current year, we are actually facing a very frightening situation where the economy would be down close to 5 to 6%, minus 5 to 6%. Now, in the beginning itself, within 1 month of the COVID lockdown, and even before that, because if you remember, even in the month of January, when the report came out from NSSO about the unemployment rate, which had climbed up to 7.5%, and it was suppressed by the government, we have seen that there has been a steady decline in the creation of jobs. But under COVID, there is a contraction in jobs. And we are expecting, if the ILO report is to be seen all over India, it's going to be a very large, almost 12 crore Indians who would have lost their jobs. And if you look at it in the perspective of Rajasthan, even if we were to look at in proportion to the population, it would be close to 80 to 90 lakh jobs which have got extinguished. So, so the demand has completely been destroyed, which was being destroyed ever since demonetization. That has got accelerated. And with no demand, we are seeing a major issue in terms of the state revenues. So if we were to look at only the state revenues, they are also continuously going down. In the last 2 months, which is April and May, the state has lost close to 3,000 crores every month in its revenues, and the additional expenditure in these last 1.5 months has been to the extent of 2,000 crores. So we are we were in deficit earlier, and now you have a further reduction in the revenues. One other major issue which I think we will need to consider is the fact that, as Dr. Rao had talked about CSS, that there is likely to be a further reduction in the grants to CSS by the central government. There is another catch to it, which is that ever since the Finance Commission dispensation taking up the devolution to 42%, under the centrally sponsored scheme, the state government's contribution has been increased to 50%. Now, with the state governments strapped for resources, having very little money even to pay the salaries, they cannot bring in the counterpart funding for CSS. And therefore, a large amount of first installment is lying in the state governments without being utilized because they are not able to bring in their counterpart funding for the CSS. The same is the situation with externally aided projects. Externally aided projects, when the loans are granted, the condition is that they will be reimbursing the expenditure done by the state governments. So the state government must first spend and then send its bills to the multilateral organizations, who will then do their reviews and then release the funds. And the cycle takes about 4 months or 5 months before the money comes into the state. Now, as the state governments don't have money, they cannot spend money, so they cannot even resort to already sanctioned externally aided projects. The other part, I think, which is also very alarming, which I think Dr. Rao has not touched upon, but I would like to bring to the notice of the participants, is the fact that the government of India has taken two decisions which again are detrimental to the states being able to raise finance. First, the Chief Minister's Relief Fund has been excluded, in my opinion, which is not as per the law, has been excluded from contributions by CSR. And although we have no idea about the PM CARES Fund, but the general belief is that they have been able to raise close to 12,000 crores from the corporates based on the CSR funding that they have to give. But the state governments have not been able to mobilize under the Chief Minister's Relief Fund monies because they have been excluded from CSR. The second decision that the government of India has taken is that they have gone to the multilateral organizations, each one of them, like Asian Development Bank or the World Bank, have a country limit. In a year, they limit the amount that they will lend to a country. So for instance, in India, the Asian Development Bank limit would be something close to $3.5 billion or $4 billion. Government of India has sequestered most of the funding from multilaterals to central schemes, and therefore the state governments have very little window to be able to go and get new loans, even if they were in a condition to spend. The question about ways and means advances, and this was also raised by the state government of Rajasthan. In fact, we were amongst the first few who had sent in the report on restarting economic activity to the government of India. We had stated that 1 lakh crore of interest-free window should be opened for the state governments on the ways and means advance side. Now, the interesting thing about ways and means advances, that the interest that the Reserve Bank of India charges on it actually goes back to the central government as dividend, because it becomes a surplus with RBI. So whatever money RBI makes by way of its profits, they are transferred to central government. We have seen in the last 2 years or 3 years, central government has actually dissipated the reserves of the RBI, stating that they have a claim on these reserves as a surplus of the RBI. So the central government has no problem if it borrows on ways and means from the government of India, because there is a circularity to the interest they pay to the RBI. But the state governments have to pay the interest rate, and which actually becomes the profit of the government of India. So under COVID also, under a situation of which is as grave as this, the government of India would still continue to make profit from the state governments for their expenditure for fighting the pandemic, which they have to do in accordance with the diktats of the central government. So which means that the expenditure they have to incur, if it was left to themselves, they may have done the expenditure wisely in a different way. But because they have had to follow by word and spirit every notification issued by the government of India, the cost of dealing with the pandemic has been much higher than what it would have been otherwise. So here is the catch. Government of India is asking and telling and demanding from the state governments, including telling the state governments to pay for the tickets of the migrant labor, so the railways can make money on it. They which in turn reduces the burden on the central budget. They to feed the migrant laborers to when they are coming into railway stations and other places, but they have not decided to give any grants or any kind of facility, financial facility to the state government. So this is one part. And the second part is, I do believe, and I think it is something where the government of India has been short-sighted, that in times like this, when the demand is flat, when expenditure is not happening, when people are not buying, and people are losing jobs, so therefore they have lesser money to buy, there's a vicious cycle which has been created. Where will indirect taxes come from? And therefore, when government of India puts cash in the hands of the people to spend, in times like these, it becomes an investment, because whatever money the people are going to spend, anywhere, I mean, on an average, 12 to 14% of that or more will go back to the government as a tax. So it is actually you are creating a virtuous cycle when people will start getting jobs, investments will come back, and therefore this will improve the economy. So I think we have seen a situation where the sudden lockdown has been detrimental as much as demonetization. In fact, more than what demonetization was. It has completely wiped out the informal sector, and it is going to take a very long time to come back, especially because the government of India has been advised by its advisors, and I don't know who advises them, that if they take supply side measures, if they put lots of loans in the market, you do not have, economy will get revived. I don't know who will take the loans and who will repay the loans and how they will repay the loans. I will stop there now, and maybe we can have questions and answers. And if there's anything else that anybody wishes to know, I would be happy to provide the answers. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, sir, for your insightful comparison between the center and state, and telling us about what are the problems which the state governments are going to face in this situation. Since Dr. Mairam will have to leave early, so we have some questions for you, sir. So we'll just have one or two questions so that you can take it up from the Rajasthan economy's perspective.
Yes.
So the question is, as you also mentioned, that the state finances are pretty much weak, and it has been since quite some time. So how do you think that the state government is going to increase its spending on the revival of the state economy? What is going to be the steps taken by the state government in this situation? Sir.
See, there's no short answer to that, because the state government, as Dr. Rao also said, has very few instruments at its hand, or Professor Vijay Singh had said. And the monetary and fiscal instruments are with the central government. So the state government don't have it. But There has been a lot of discussion, for instance, to float perpetual bonds. We are trying to see if there is any legal possibility of doing that, which are called console. I think there has been a lot of discussion on those where government continues to gives an interesting or attractive rate of interest and pays the interest regularly. But the principle, there is no terminal date, and the state government redeems it as and when. At some point of time, it can also be, kind of listed, so the trading happens and liquidity is created because of the trading on the market. So we are looking at some financial capital market instruments to see if we are able to get some additional resources, including infrastructure investment trusts for some of our infrastructure, which is paying infrastructure like transmission lines or roads with tolls onto that. So monetization of assets in different ways. Also looking at certain public-private partnerships to happen so that more investments begin to come into the state, especially in going forward in those areas where we have a lot of assets which we can recycle, bringing in a private partner instead of selling them, make them into productive assets through private sector management. So we're looking at a lot of those possibilities. But I must say this, that at the end of the day, unless the government of India steps up to the plate, it is going to be very tough for the state governments to be able to really increase its expenditure.
Right. Thank you, sir. There is another question. There has been a discussion in the previous webinars also that this reverse migration has also created a lot of issues as far as the migrants coming into the states and for the industrialists who are working in the states, because they are now short of migrants. So what are the specific policies or the areas in which the state government is planning, considering the situation of the migrants and industrialists in the state?
See, one thing we have to remember that, again, there is no magic wand. You cannot force people. We don't have a situation. In fact, I was quite surprised when the Karnataka government decided that they will not allow the migrants to leave. We are not living in a country where you can have bonded labor. People must move at their own will. So we need to create those conditions when people will feel, not fearful. And the manner in which the migrant labor has been treated in the last 2 months, I think they will take a long while coming back. So therefore, we will need to skill more of the people within the state. We are already looking at mapping those skill gaps which are now filled by the migrant labor. So it is not as if we are, because Rajasthan sends out a lot of migrant labor and also gets a lot of migrant labor. Obviously, there is a mismatch in the skills. The people who have certain skills don't find jobs in Rajasthan because that kind of economic activity is not happening. And those kind of activities which are happening, perhaps those skills are not there in the state. So we'll need to do that skill gap mapping, and then undertake a huge program of skilling people, which then will be able to get absorbed closer to their homes in economic activities. Over a period of time, I think all over the country we'll have to do that. And that would also be one way of reducing regional imbalances. Because today, if you look at from Bihar or Odisha or Uttar Pradesh, a lot of people go out because those are the states where a lot of industrialization has not happened because of law and order situation, political instability, and all other kind of issues. So those things will need to be tackled. In states like Punjab, I think they will move towards much higher level of mechanization than they have had till today. So each state will have to find its own solution.
Okay, thank you. So thank you for your inputs. We'll have some questions for Professor Rao also. Sir, the question is, before the announcement of this package by the central government, the public debt of the central government was almost around 72% of the GDP. So do you think that with this much of the debt, the government, how do you think that the financing is going to take place for the central government? Isn't a critical issue from the central government's perspective?
Sorry to interrupt. Would you allow me to leave now, because I have to be for a conference at 12:30?
Uh,
So thank you very much, and my apologies to Professor Rao.
Thank you.
I mean, it's always a pleasure to listen to him, and I really learned a lot even today. So I want to thank him very much, and thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you for sparing your time for us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Ah,
Yes, sir.
you want me to talk about the central perspective.
Yes, sir.
Now, the problem is that, these are not regular, usual times. It's like, so we are fighting a war. So in war, one of the most important principles that one has to recognize is that you should not follow any principle. That is basically the thing, because you need to really, survive, and you need to survive and revive. So in this particular environment, there will be increase in debt to GDP ratio. Obviously, we will have to allow for that, because at the end of the day, debt to GDP ratio will have to come down by increasing the GDP. And increasing the GDP cannot happen by saying that I will not borrow. That's basically the point. One of the credit rating agencies has said that, in fact, it's a Standard and Poor, which basically has said that it might turn out to be some, the overall GDP, debt to GDP might happen something like 84%. But I'm not sure that it will be as much, because, one of the things, in fact, what Mayuramji didn't mention was that there will be a massive restructuring of expenditure priorities. In fact, you see, this year, what is likely to happen is that every state government is going to cut down on its capital expenditure. There is no way, because there is no hurry for capital expenditure. Now you are actually doing the firefighting. There will be massive cut on the capital expenditure, and then obviously your revenue deficit will increase substantially. That's not this thing. But there will also be some other issues. In fact, Karnataka has said that in places like Bangalore, it has asked the Bangalore Development Authority to identify something like 12,000 corner plots, corner sites, and auction them. And they are expecting something like 15,000 crores, which is, because you see, the 2.5% of GDP, you are going to have, additional fiscal deficit because of this problem, for additional expenditure on health, for saving lives and livelihood, and then lower revenue that you get. So the additional 2% that you get by way of tax, by way of loan, is not going to really compensate you fully, because the GDP itself is going to come down. Now, when you have that sort of a situation, you need to try and then find out how to monetize your assets. One of the things that has been said is that they need to really look where the money is. Selling of some land in urban agglomeration, maybe it's in Jaipur or Udaipur and some of these places. Ask the development authority to identify and then auction the land and monetize the land. That's one of the things. Karnataka has also done another thing, saying that in all these urban areas, land has been a big thing, and land sharks have been big sharks. There has been so much of unauthorized construction, illegal construction, and things like that has happened, and they have taken away the government land and so there have been constructions there. Now you have not been able to do anything. You are not able to do anything. What the government of Karnataka has decided is to do and find out what is the plot size, and then work out what would be the guidance value of that land. A certain percentage of guidance value you pay to the government, and then regularize that. So this regularization of, you may say that there is a moral hazard issue, but the point is you have not been able to do anything. Possibly regularizing this could bring in certain amount of revenue. So, but when all is said and done, fiscal deficits of this country will go up, both center and the state together, to somewhere about 11.5%, 12%. And if that goes up, obviously, the debt will increase. The debt will increase this year, debt will increase next year. Thereafterwards, if you are able to take the right set of policies, if the GDP goes down, the debt to GDP ratio will decline. will start declining. It will start declining because the GDP will have to, growth rate will have to be higher. So long as the GDP growth rate is higher than the rate of interest that you pay on the government loan, if you do not have the primary deficit, then obviously the debt to GDP ratio will come down. So there will be a significant increase in the debt to GDP ratio, and that is one of the worries. But then one of the important things that you also need to do is, your external debt is only 20% of the total debt. So much of it is internal debt. So there is no serious payment, serious problem as far as the external stability is concerned. But then internally, you need to really monitor it closely, and there is no other way. Credit rating agencies will be always looking like hawks on what your deficit is. But point is that we just can't please the credit rating agencies and not undertake steps to revive the economy.
Okay, sir. One more question, sir. I think you have covered many issues, and as you also mentioned that land monetization can be one of those areas where the state governments can also garner some of the finances. So just to ask you that, what should be, from your perspective, should be the policy prescription in order to garner the finances in this situation? Or let's say, can it be a situation where the state or the center can cut down on their taxes for some time being in order to boost demand? Can it be a solution? So what can be some prescription from the finances point of view?
I am of the view that, you can't be using tax policy as a kamadhenu. The objective of tax policy is to raise revenue and then just confine it to that. We already have loaded tax policy with so many objectives. And I think, the best principle of taxation is to broaden the base, reduce the rate differences, and have a simple structure. More the incentives that you give through taxes, more the complications that you create, and more the misuse of the things that will happen. As it is, you are going to have a very serious problem. Tax is going to come down very distinct because there will be a huge number of bankruptcies, which has not been talked about. In fact, when you talked about the migrant labor, one of the things is that the demand for labor itself is going to come down because there will be a large number of bankruptcies from the small and medium industries. And these the people are not going to, there will be a lot of problem in surviving. There will be a problem in fact, there will be huge NPAs. In fact, that is going to go up because everything is going to come, come down to until the time, all this moratorium period is over. So I would say that what the government should do is to, not to complicate the system. There may be a rationale for, reforming the tax, particularly the GST, and to reduce the complications and, making it 2, instead of 4 rates, bringing it to 2. That's a different issue. But not giving a relief at this particular moment, or relief for some sectors vis-a-vis other sectors. Even if you give general relief, it will work differently for different sectors. And that is not your objective. What you need to do is to basically, as soon as possible, lift the economy from lockdown. That is the biggest stimulus you can give to the economy. And then once that happens, then obviously the government of India will have to really increase the cash transfers to the vulnerable sections, because that is going to be, and create a demand situation. And when you create the demand situation, then, economy can, come up. Narega is one thing, but then a person who was earning about 12,000 rupees a month in Bangalore, if he gets only about 6,000 rupees in a month, some 5,000 rupees a month there, he cannot run the family. And, he doesn't have the reserves. So obviously there has to be, you need to create the jobs. And in order to create the jobs, the best thing is to basically through the cash transfers, basically through the expenditure incentives, rather than trying to mess up with the tax system.
Okay, sir. Thank you. Thank you for the comprehensive coverage of the financial aspects from the center and state's perspective. Now I would request Professor Singh to give us concluding remarks and wrap up our discussions. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Yash. Professor Govinda Rao and Dr. Arvind Mayaramji has debated all the issues, and some concerns are very serious. When Professor Govinda Rao says that there has to be cut in centrally sponsored schemes, and Dr. Mayram says that even if center is giving these centrally sponsored schemes, states are not able to contribute their 50% share. It means these centrally sponsored schemes are going to be defunct for a time being, until unless the center has funds or the states are able to contribute their share. Another issue, this crude oil being debated for a long time, not long time before COVID also, that when you have put petroleum prices on a free market, so when there is a reduction in prices, that reduction in prices should be passed on to consumers. But this is not happening. Initially, we were saying that government is giving subsidies, so they should not be giving subsidies. So the concept is not coming up with crude oil. Whenever something happens, consumer is the biggest victim through crude oil. That is, the international price reduction benefit is not being transferred to consumer, while the rise of prices is dealt as a burden. So that can be the benefit for the government for both state and the center. Conditional borrowing is certainly, the conditions may be very harsh, created by the Center for Market Borrowing of the state government, but there is opportunity also. The opportunity is that state government may be forced to go for reforms, and this has been a for a long time debate, that state government or state finances and particularly their expenditure side to be reformed, and certainly the borrowing cannot be the long time issue. Government cannot borrow for the long time. Now, the loss of state revenue due to unemployment, less expenditure by the consumer, demand side problem. Now, one issue comes out very clearly. This we are talking about the unemployment in informal sector, demands loss due to job loss in unemployment sector, informal sector. But one thing we can visualize, that even the state governments are not going to recruit people in the short term. They may be announcing jobs, but I don't think they are in the position to afford the recruit new people and pay them the salary. Other case, they say that one thing good which Dr. Mayram said, that one is very clear: whosoever migrant workers has gone back to their homes, they have some type of skill, or majority of them have some type of skill, and government of Rajasthan is going for this mapping of skill gap amongst the migrant workers. If that happens, they can start some work, because they are not going to go back to cities the very soon. Generally, we debated earlier also that government should be putting some money in the hands of people. The issue here is, again and again, we are debating who are those people? Where is the reliable data? Do we have that type of data, that who are the people should be giving money, how much money? So that is again a big constraint that has been a big constraint, not a new issue. Now, certainly the issue is to be resolved between the center and state, and center also has limitation in generating revenues. They have only one option, which is quite visible, that they can go for heavy borrowing. But one thing to my mind come very clearly, that government of India should not be looking towards the rating agencies. For the time being, rating does not matter. If you grow in future, you can come back to the ratings. So we should not be bothered about the rating agency. We should be looking about the internal economy. Another important aspect which can lead to basically that can be the states. COVID has taught us one lesson, that is, there has to be localization of manufacturing. You cannot dependent on others for everything. So I hope these skill, after this skill gapping, we are in the position to use that skill for local manufacturing, and these levers can be absorbed. With that, I stop here, and I thank both Professor Govinda Rao and Dr. Arvind Mayram for sparing their valuable time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Now I think we'll close the discussion, and on behalf of the Niti Aayog chair, the Indian Econometric Society and Rajasthan Economic Association, I would like to thank Professor M. Govinda Rao, Dr. Arvind Mayram, and Professor Vijay Veer Singh for sparing their time and discussing the relevant aspect of the finances as far as the COVID is concerned. I'm also thankful to Dr. GL Meena, Secretary REA, for his support in the conduction of this webinar. And also, I would like to thank all the participants for sparing their time and joining us for this webinar. Thank you, everyone. Good day to you. Thank you.